Sid and Marty Krofft, and like Marty Krofft died last year. Sid's still with us.
Wow, they have to be. He has to be in their 80s or 90s.
Yeah, I mean, they were kind of kicking around in the 50s. Like Sid was kind of like the creative guy. Marty was the business guy. Sid had this puppet show, the La Poupée de Paris, and it was like this nude puppet show. It was like a puppet burlesque show, and it was like the 50s. So it was like the 50s were such like a nothing decade, so bland that it was like this like naked puppets was like blowing everybody's mind. It was this sensation.
I'm like, somebody's like, what?
They did a pilot about like a lion in like the late 50s, I think like 1959 or something, and then that didn't get picked up. But it looked like kind of like a Kukla, Fran and Ollie kind of thing. It looked pretty interesting. You can watch it on YouTube. And then they did banana splits.
I saw those in syndication.
And that was like, they did that for Hanna-Barbera. And then after that, they started doing their own stuff. They did HR Puffin stuff. And then they were kind of off to the races after that. These things do occasionally come back. Like there was like an Electro Woman and Dyna Girl Legendary Pictures like reboot. It was like, a digital, direct-to-digital thing. So like these things do come back from time to time.
That's interesting that you were vibing on this right now, because fan of the show Murgo like reached out to me and was asked if I had ever seen Electro Woman and Dyna Girl.
Oh, okay.
And I had never. I was actually literally going to watch that on Tubi.
Oh, that's so
right
funny.
Before you mentioned.
Yeah, Electro Woman and Dyna Girl's real good. It's kind of like Adam West Batman, but like in the 70s with like even smaller budget, you know? Yeah. I get the feeling that they were pretty protective with their properties, because like there was that Banana Splits movie recently where the Banana Splits guys are like serial killers. And it was basically, there was going to be a Five Nights at Freddy's movie, and then the sort of deal fell through. And so then it was like, okay, well, let's go ahead with this movie. We'll just use different characters. So they used the Banana Splits. Banana Splits were owned by Hanna-Barbera or whoever owns, the Hanna-Barbera stuff. I get the feeling like Sid and Marty would have never done that with any of it. Like if somebody said, oh, we want to make a like a show where HR Puffin stuff is a serial killer. Yeah, I think that they were like more protect, like they knew that wouldn't like fit their thing.
Folks were asking if they were like how into drugs they were, and they said they weren't at what's
that was that was the big question, because it was just the timing. It's two guys, so they'd ask Marty, and Marty again, like Sid was the creative guy, Marty was the business guy. So like Marty would of course. Like usually he'd make a joke. The consensus seems to be that they think that, Marty, who knows, but Sid probably. It was the timing, because you have HR Puffin stuff, and it's so like, it's 1969. It's so part of that, they're just trying to capture like, okay, what does 1969 look like? And so it's, they're trying to capture that thing. So of course it's gonna be a little groovy.
Well, yeah, I was gonna say like, I would not want to be on acid watching any of this.
Right.
I'd be like...
Well, so what was your experience with these shows prior to this week?
I haven't watched any of them in real like time. It would have been before my time. Mm-hmm. But when I was little, somehow I would see HR Puffin stuff. That was the one I would see like... And Banana Splits, somehow I saw a lot of that. HR Puffin stuff. And then, other than that, the only other one was Bigfoot and Wild Boy. Yeah. Which, for some reason, Eagle Video in Greensburg had, like, the entire Bigfoot and Wild Boy on VHS. Okay. And I would just go in there and rent every one of them. Mm-hmm. And they're like, this guy's back to get, like, Bigfoot and Wild Boy
right, because, yeah, if you're into Bigfoot, that's a good one, too. Part of the Banana Splits, they had Danger Island. And, directed by Richard Donner. And I recently... Not too long, like probably around the time we started this channel, somebody posted on YouTube like a super cut of all the Banana Splits episode, like because it was a serial that was on the Banana Splits, so it was all the Danger Island stuff in one, like basically like a movie, and it's amazing.
Wow, that sounds awesome. Like, yeah, HR Puffin stuff is the one I've seen the most. Haven't watched the Lidsville. Okay. Or any of until now.
These things came out in like HR Puffin stuff came out in like 1969. I think the Bugaloos was like 1970. So it's like, there's like more or less one every year, one or two a year. So I mean, that was before my time. But they'd been in syndication, after that, and in the late 70s and early 80s, they would like sort of package them together and stuff.
Yeah.
At some point, I saw those, and it was very early for me. I was probably in preschool, maybe even younger. So these things are like elemental memories, like the Bugaloos and H.R. Puffin stuff. It's like so, like it was just like embedded. It was all real to me, because you see this stuff now, and it's so, it's kind of cheesy, and that's part of the charm
that.
too. But like as a kid, I just like believed it, and H.R. Puffin stuff, and they just felt like this like real, credible, magical world. And then early 80s, those things went off the air, and then you didn't really see them again. You didn't really see them again until like the 90s, and then they started having them on TV Land and stuff. So like there was this big gap of time where I didn't see this, and I had them so built up in my mind. And then like in the 90s, I started watching, like they were on, I was watching them, and I was just shocked at how like cheesy and ridiculous. I was kind of like, because it was like,
when
I
you're
just
little,
had them
you
built
fill
up
in,
in my head.
you fill in the like you spackle over the cracks.
In Puffin stuff, they like talk to the west wind, and it's like, as a kid, it was this like elemental, it's like this face on the clouds, and he's like loud and booming, and so, and like I just so like, it just felt so like mythological. It felt like, the gods or something. And then in the 90s when I'm watching it, and it's like this like paper mache face against a green screen, and he's doing a John Wayne imitation. He's the West Wind. Yeah. So he's like, "Hey, Pilgrim, we're gonna blow some air," and I was like, "Oh, what?"
Another John Wayne impersonator on Lidsville. Mm-hmm. That had a lot of John
they have
Wayne.
like stock stuff, like
Dodge the Draft.
The humor and stuff was like hack. It was like, it's like, "Yo, dirty rat."
I was into that.
Yeah.
It was. You might say it was tickling my Mickey Dolenz bone.
Yeah, well, because the Bugaloos, they were saying like for the Bugaloos, they were saying they wanted to make something like the Monkees.
Yeah,
and so yeah,
Mickey Dolenz circuit activated.
Yeah, see?
Mashing.
It's like Generation X stuff, and it's like older Generation X stuff, because of like late 60s and early 70s. But I feel like, there's like people my age who caught that second wave of it. And it was like, I remember even as like a little kid, it gave me something I could like relate to with like my aunts and uncles, because like they grew up with like the 60s and early 70s stuff. And then I'm watching the 80s. So like we had, I remember going to like the car wash with my aunt once, and we're in the car wash, and like she was saying that like the the one thing that was like brushing the car, she was saying it looked like Puffin Stuff's hair, and it was like, okay, we're on the same.
Well, my
page.
cousins would make references to this stuff too, like Witchy Poo or like other characters they'd mention. I'm like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, some of this stuff has soaked into public consciousness, but I wondered how, because like to me, I had like direct experience with just about all of these shows, pretty much all the way through. Like Jim Nabors as a android in the Lost Saucer.
So good, singing voice or whatever.
Right, and this is a question that may be put to our audience, but like it's like there's the Krofft Superstars and the Krofft Super Show. Now, when I was a kid, I remember there being a Kraft Superstars or Kraft Super Show. So I don't know if maybe I just didn't understand what Krofft was, so I assumed it was like Kraft singles.
Okay.
Or if there really was like a Kraft.
They might be
show.
trying to like capitalize.
Yeah, I don't know. Probably just remembering it wrong. The Muppets were around in the Muppets were kind of like Sid and Marty Krofft. They were kind of like bumping around here and there, late 50s and through the 60s, and then eventually, got onto TV in various forms. With Muppets, they were doing like commercials and stuff, but eventually, like they get their own shows, and then they're kind of like, off to the races. But I always kind of wondered, like, why is it that the Muppets seemed to get so much like respect and were kind of like embraced by the intelligentsia or whatever, where it feels like the Sid and Marty Krofft stuff was always derided. Like it was like the kids loved it. But
like the character designs and stuff,
yeah.
Maybe it's that the characters are in these worlds where the Muppets are kind of like
in our world,
free flowing.
Yeah, I just wonder what that, because it does seem like the Muppets got like embraced, and like the Muppets had like a cool factor, and they would get they get good press.
Oh yeah.
Where Sid and Marty Krofft, it seemed to me like, oh, that's junk, and like maybe with like Puffin stuff and maybe Lidsville, like maybe at the very beginning they were kind of like hip in like the drug crowd, but I think pretty soon after that it was like, oh, this is schlock, this is like garbage, this is lowest common denominator junk for kids, where it's like, you know, it's really not. Like, obviously everything has like a cheap look to it, but there's such an ambition to it and a creativity and an imagination, and like you said, the designs, it's so unique, and they're so like shooting for the moon on this like shoestring budget, where like you could make something less ambitious and more respectable, but also less interesting, you know, boring, maybe, you know.
Well, watching, what was the space one? Oh, I can't even remember the name of it.
Far Out Space
Far
Nuts?
Out Space Nuts.
Yeah.
Watching the first episode of that, I hadn't watched that before. That is like the spiritual origins of like MST3K, it feels like. Mm-hmm. They're like jumpsuits, the way the setup is, literally like, just like their interstitials on that.
And just the puppetry. And I'm sure if you talk to those guys, the MST3K guys, they cite that as an influence. You're right. I hadn't thought of that, but yeah. And
they got the jumpsuits on, and like they're in the spaceship, and I was like, it just
and being, you're right, the setup is the same, because it's like these like workaday guys. Like he's not an astronaut. Yeah. He's like just the guy who like tightens the bolts and stuff. Yeah.
So I feel like that I'd never seen it before. I was like, oh man, this is like,
no, that's awesome.
They're tapping into that.
So we're gonna go down the list. Like, we're gonna do individual episodes about the different shows. So this is like the teaser. This is setting us up. I have so much affection for this stuff, and I feel like I can't, like, and there's so much nostalgia, but I feel like I can kind of separate that and view it a little bit objectively. Like, no, like there are some really wonderful things going on in these shows, but I didn't know for sure. We'll see you next time for more Krofft content.
See you out there in
in Lidsville.